Hello and welcome to the DisruptAbility podcast presented by Inclusive Cork. Today we are talking to Dermot Crosby from the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection, who will give us valuable advice on all the support grants available to private sector employers for the recruitment and retention of employees with disabilities. Thanks for listening. So today I would like to warmly welcome Dermot Crosby from the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection. Thank you very much for coming into the podcast to talk to us today.
Thanks very much, Claire.
Brilliant. And today we're going to talk about everything to do with disability and business supports. Supports for all the businesses who want to do something about disability, employ disability, retain disability, support disability in the workplace. And you're going to tell us all about it because you're the expert on that. All right.
Well, I'll try and give you as much information as I have anyway. I'll do my best.
I know, absolutely. How long have you been with the Department of Employment Affairs?
I'm with the Department of Employment Affairs since January 2012. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, I was with FÁS. Before 2012, it was FÁS that had the responsibility for providing labour market supports and services for job seekers with disabilities.
Okay.
So I joined FÁS in 2003 and came over to the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection in 2012. Mm-hmm. My role there, Claire, is disability case officer. Mm-hmm. So the clients that I deal with every day are people with disabilities, people on disability payments, and not every person with a disability is in receipt of a disability payment.
Exactly.
So it's often the case that somebody comes in and they've got a disability, they've got a medical condition, and they're in receipt of a standard job seekers payment. Mm-hmm. So it's my job then to show them all the options that are available. Mm-hmm. Some people are interested in training, upskilling, maybe taking up an employment program, and then ultimately getting back to work.
Okay.
So
perfect.
I go through each one of those options and usually we try and land on the right one that suits the client at the time.
Perfect. So there's lots of support there. Go in. So the message to individuals is go in and talk to the case officers because you are there to help them make the right choices in the avenues that they take.
Absolutely.
And get back to work.
There's lots of options out there. And I suppose just in terms of the age group of people that I deal with, some young people are just out of school. Mm-hmm. Some people may have been working for years, they've been made redundant. Other people may have acquired a disability.
Okay, which is the most common? I think 70% of disabilities are acquired between the ages of 18 and 65.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're already of working age or at work, so retention is a huge area. Okay.
I suppose in terms of statistics, there's one that just comes to mind, Claire. 20% of people are born with a disability.
Okay.
And then, I think over 70% of people acquire the disability then in later life.
Okay, right.
So it's a mixture of all ages, really.
It is. It's all ages, it's all cultures, it's all religions, it's all genders, it's all sexual orientations. Yeah. Disability does not discriminate.
No.
Okay, so that's the message to get out there. It can happen to anyone during their human life cycle.
It can land on anybody's doorstep.
Exactly. Okay, so today we're talking about business. Mm-hmm. All right. What will we start with? There are so many grants, there are so many supports for business, and from our talking before, I've realised that businesses aren't always utilising the grants that are there. Is it because they don't know about them, or they're afraid of disability? What's going on?
I think at this stage, Claire, my colleagues and I were hoarse from promoting the various grants, and we've been promoting them for many years at this stage. And employers will still tell us or say to us when we do meet them that we've never heard of these grants before. Mm-hmm. And as I say, we're quite hoarse from promoting them. But just to mention some of the grants, one that's going very, very well for us at the moment is the wage subsidy scheme. Okay. We refer to it as the WSS. Mm-hmm. It's a fantastic grant. It was a long, slow burn for us. And what I mean by that is, very few people initially started on WSS. And today, thankfully, we have approximately 300 people employed in Cork City and County who are employed through the WSS. Basically, it's a subsidy that's paid to an employer to encourage them to employ a person with a disability. And again, disability being very, very broad. Most people, when they hear the term disability, they think of a wheelchair user or somebody using a white cane, and that's not the case at all. As you know, most disability is hidden. Mm-hmm. To break down the WSS in terms of the subsidy is €5.30 per hour. To qualify, the employee must work a minimum of 21 hours per week, and the subsidy will cut out at 39 hours per week, because 39 hours is considered full-time work. If somebody is employed full-time, the grant is just under €11,000 per year, €10,748 per year. Mm-hmm. If an employer employs 3 people on the scheme, and we have quite a lot of employers who employ more than one person on WSS, they will obviously get 3 subsidies, but then they will qualify for a 10% bonus. So again, it's another incentive. Mm-hmm. The bonus increases as you employ more people on the scheme. Mm-hmm. It goes up to 20% when you employ 7 people on the scheme, 30% when you get to 16 people, and if you can get to 23 people employed on WSS, then the bonus is 50%. So, you know, it is a good incentive.
So do you find that the employers who are using the WSS scheme tend to move and employ more, like not just one, but end up with 3 to get onto the different strands?
Some do.
Yeah.
I suppose we find that it's mostly small to medium size enterprises that avail of WSS. There are 1 or 2 larger companies, but it's mostly the small employers. And for example, if an employer had maybe 2 shops or 3 shops, they may not be able to employ 3 people on WSS in the one site. But if they've got 2 or 3 shops, they could certainly employ 1 person in each shop. Mm-hmm. So it's an easier way to qualify for the 10% bonus and employ more people on WSS.
Number 1, though, the person has to be in receipt of a disability allowance payment. Am I right?
No. I suppose number 1, the criteria to qualify for WSS, the employee must have a disability. Okay? And as it happens, most people are in receipt of a disability payment, but you must have a disability. And just to extend this a little bit further, your disability must impede your ability to do the job, resulting in a productivity shortfall of 20%. It's important to highlight that, because there are an awful lot of people out there with disabilities who can work away fine, and it doesn't impact on their ability to do the job. So for people that are on the WSS, one of the criterion is that they've got a productivity shortfall because of their disability.
So they might just do things more slowly, etc.
Yes.
Okay.
But having said that, we review the WSS every year. We review it to make sure everything is okay, that the employer is happy, that the employee is happy, that the employee is still doing the job that they were employed to do on day 1, and that they're being paid correctly and so on. Mm-hmm. Just to make sure everything is above board. But we can often find that if somebody starts on WSS and if they've got a mild learning difficulty, for example, if somebody's doing a repetitive task, it might take them a little bit longer to come up to speed, but because the job is repetitive, they can come pretty close to full productivity. It just takes them a little bit longer to come up to speed, so to speak.
And if they come up to full productivity, does the employer lose the WSS grant then?
In some cases that can happen. Okay. In some cases that can happen. But I suppose when we do a review, we have to justify the WSS, so there has to be a productivity shortfall. Mm-hmm. Not everyone that will go on WSS will be there forever. Some people will go on WSS maybe to get their foot in the door, because when they start there is a genuine productivity shortfall. But the longer they're in the company, they get more and more used to the duties and to the tasks, more used to their environment. And when you go back to review the WSS, there may not be a productivity shortfall. And the employer is happy with the employee, and we've had several cases where the employer would just forego the subsidy.
But that's a success story.
And it is a success story.
It brings people in the door. It gives a little bit of support to the employer, to the employee, gives them a chance to come up to speed, and then they have a job.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
And you know, it's important to highlight that. Now, there are people on WSS who will always be on it, and we're quite happy with that, and that's what the WSS is for.
Yes.
But some people go on the WSS and they use it for as long as they need it, and in some cases then they can come off WSS, and that's fine too.
So that's a really successful scheme.
It is. It's a success story.
How do you prove, if you're not on a disability payment but you have a disability and you want to use the WSS scheme, how else can you prove you have a disability to the case officer, to the department?
Okay, well, if you're not on a disability payment, we've got what we call a confidential medical report, which must be completed by your doctor. And also, if there's any other medical documentation to, I suppose, substantiate the disability, you know, often kids in school will have educational assessments carried out, psychological reports, that type of information.
That all, put it together,
give
it to the case officer, and then you say, yes, you can use it. So that was from the point of view of an individual coming in, but how does the business apply for the WSS scheme? Okay. What hoops or gates do they have to go through?
Okay. I might just, I suppose, broaden this a little bit. One of the other services that we provide is job coach support. And there's an agency that's available nationwide in Ireland. It's called Employability. In different parts of the country they've got different names, but essentially it's mostly this Employability throughout the country. They're a fantastic service, and they provide job coach support to people with disabilities. So again, if a client comes into me and if they're job ready and they're ready to return to work, I can refer them to a job coach. The job coach then will meet them every week and help them find a job, be it full-time or part-time. And one of the employment support tools that the job coach can use is the WSS. So many of the WSS applications that come in will often come in via the job coach. So the job coach will help a client secure employment. First of all, secure an interview, go through a mock interview situation, prepare them for the interview, and when the person secures the job, then the job coach will go through the paperwork for the employer and for the job seeker.
Okay. Do employers register with Employability to say we have jobs and we want to hire people with disabilities? Is that how employers can let the world know that they have jobs and they specifically want to hire people with disabilities?
They can do it in two ways. They can certainly contact Employability, yes, absolutely. They can contact Employability, and they do that all the time. Because at this stage the job coaches have made some fantastic contacts with employers over the years. So the employer will contact Employability, speak to their job coach and say, look, we've got 2 vacancies coming up here over the next few weeks. Do you have anybody in your books? Because Employability will have a database of people with disabilities, job seekers with disabilities who are job ready. Okay, so that's option one. If an employer has a vacancy available, they can also contact Jobs Ireland. Now, Jobs Ireland is the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection's own website for promoting the various jobs, full-time and part-time. There's also course information there as well, information on C schemes and employment programs as well.
All right. Loads of possibilities
There's lots
for
of possibilities.
Employers to show they have jobs. Okay, so that's WSS and that's Employability.
Yes.
Another grant for employers. What else do we have?
Okay,
in the bag?
Yeah. Well, I tell you, Claire, I suppose it's just great to get the opportunity here to promote it.
Yeah.
The other grant that's very popular is called the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant.
Yes.
And basically, this grant, it covers the cost of any non-standard equipment that an employee requires to help them do their job. I suppose an employee with a disability. I should have mentioned that. And again, just to give you some examples, if an employee with a disability, for example, they might be visually impaired, if they require a large computer monitor, that's seen as non-standard, the grant will cover the cost of that. The maximum grant is €6,350, and it's not just a once-off payment. If somebody applies to the grant in 2016 and again in 2018 they require an update to software, whatever the case may be, they can reapply for the grant. One of the largest disability cohorts in education today is dyslexia. And when a student is in the education system, if they require some assistive technology, the school or the Department of Education will take care of the cost of that. But when that person becomes an adult and moves into employment, that responsibility lies with ourselves then, the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection. And this is where we can use the WAG, or the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant. So for somebody with dyslexia, if they require a piece of software for their computer to help them do the job, they can apply for the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant, and the grant will cover the cost of the software minus the VAT. Minus the VAT simply because you can claim it back.
Is the WAG only for businesses in the private sector, or can public sector employees apply through the WAG as well?
It's a good question, Claire. All the grants are applicable to the private sector only.
Okay.
I suppose just to follow that up by saying that, if an employee is in the civil service or public sector, then the onus is on the public sector or civil service to provide whatever supports and accommodations that the employee with a disability requires.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to unpack this one a little bit more, because I get phone calls and emails all the time from people who are working, and they want to know, are they entitled to a grant, or can their company get a grant? Hearing aids. I have a chef who is slowly losing their hearing, and they have been told they need hearing aids, but the person also has a son doing the Leaving Cert so they know they're going to have big fees in university next year, hopefully, if they get in, and they have to make a choice. Do I buy hearing aids or for my work to help me at work? And this chef finds that, especially dealing with suppliers, working on the telephone, and when their back is turned in a fridge, they don't hear what the other employees are saying. So will their company be entitled to get?
The answer is yes.
Yes, okay.
Because the key thing there is that you mentioned that the person is a chef, they're obviously in employment, so they qualify for the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant, the WAG as we call it for short. And to qualify, I suppose there's obviously criteria involved, but if you apply for some equipment and it's under if it's under €700, one quotation is required. If the equipment is between 700 and 1500, two quotations are required, and if the equipment that you require is over 1500, then three quotations are required.
Okay. And
yes, as a chef employed in the private sector, that person will be eligible for the WAG.
Because they need it for their job.
They need it for their job.
They might use that piece of equipment outside of their job as well, though. That's okay.
But obviously they're applying for it on the basis that they need it in the work environment. To
retain their job.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming very stressful for this particular person. Another question. Neurodiversities. Sensory issues.
Yeah.
We're all being advised now in the private industry to have a sensory box.
Okay.
Because if you're over the age of 30, you probably don't have an identification of autism, but if you're under the age of 30, you probably do. Okay, because of the way our education system is identifying it, etc. So you're working in a large company and you don't need the equipment every day, but you want to have access to noise cancelling headphones or stress balls. Can a company get a grant, the WAG grant, to buy equipment for a sensory room or even a sensory box? Is that something that they can get through this scheme, or am I going outside the scheme a little bit?
I think it's an excellent question. I really do. Yeah. And it's the first time this question has been asked, but I'm familiar with exactly what you're talking about, Claire. I suppose usually when an application comes in, it comes in for a specific employee. And if an employee required, as you mentioned there, the noise cancelling headphones, I can't see any problem with that at all.
Okay.
I suppose if an employer was buying something in bulk, there could be an issue around that, because it's supposed to be, the applications are for individuals. And there would never be an issue if an application comes in for a specific employee to purchase headphones, dress balls or whatever.
Right, but it has to be a specific employee.
It would be.
Yeah. And this is where, I suppose, this is what Inclusive Cork and this podcast is all about, is to empower people to stand up and say, I have a disability, can I get the supports? Because the supports are there, but no one can give you the supports unless you actually stand up and ask for them and let your employer know, this is what I need and this is how you can get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I suppose, Claire, we're taking feedback to our disability policy unit in head office all the time, based in Dublin. And, we get unusual questions from time to time, and we check the guidelines, it's outside the guidelines, so look, we have to follow guidelines. So the question goes up the line to the disability policy unit, and, they're there to make decisions and to adapt and change guidelines as well. A few years ago, we had a change to one of our grants. It's called the JIG for short, the Job Interview Interpreter Grant. Everything is abbreviated these days. And basically the Job Interview Interpreter Grant is there to provide funding for somebody deaf or hard of hearing or somebody with a speech impairment who is attending a job interview to bring along an interpreter with them and have their costs covered. And it's a fantastic grant, and it's utilised quite a lot throughout the year. But a few years ago there was some feedback that we got on the ground at a seminar, and because of the feedback that we got, again that went back to head office, and they were able to broaden the grant. So somebody who is deaf can avail of the grant to cover the cost of an interpreter at a job interview situation, but when they secure employment they can apply for the grant again to bring the interpreter into work to cover the induction period.
Okay.
So even though the grants are there and they're set out in the guidelines, feedback can always be sent to head office to try and improve a grant and a support as well.
Okay, because as well, technology is changing all the
Absolutely.
time. So of course grant guidelines are going to change because there might be a new innovation.
Absolutely.
That's what DisruptAbility is all about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to move on that because you're talking about hearing impaired and ask you about the loop system.
Okay.
Has the loop system ever been put into a private business for hearing impaired? Because it mightn't just be for one individual, it might be for the individual who's working in the company, but also for maybe other clients who are coming in and out of a company.
Claire, to the best of my knowledge, I haven't had any applications in Cork
for a loop system. Okay.
Now, having said that, there could be other applications throughout the country. Right. I'm just not aware of them. We get applications for people who are deaf and hard of hearing all the time. And again, just to give you another example, every business has to have a fire alarm system, but your deaf person won't hear the fire alarm going off. So any adaptations that need to be made to your standard fire alarm system can be made through the WAG, or the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant.
Okay.
If there's flashing beacons, and there's a very handy device, again for somebody who's deaf, and I call it a vibrate alert. But basically, if the smoke alarm, the fire alarm goes off, they've got a little device connected to their belt that starts vibrating, and it just indicates to them that the fire alarm has gone off. Okay. It's non-standard, so again, the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant will cover the cost of that.
Okay. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
But it's at the moment it's non-standard. But in terms of universal design, when people are building or fitting out an office, guys, think about hearing impaired and deaf people. Because they're in the building, they're not going to hear the alarm. Or even if there's loud equipment, you need to have that visual feedback.
Exactly.
Just like I need audio feedback because I'm vision impaired. And so are you.
Yes, right.
Right? And we need audio feedback more often. But some people need visual feedback.
That's it.
And that's what universal design is all about.
And I suppose with universal design, the time to introduce all these adaptations to the workplace is at the time of building, rather than doing it 5 years later.
And retrofitting when it's much more expensive.
And it's much more expensive.
Absolutely. Okay.
I suppose just in relation to the grants as well, Claire, I think it's important to say that we welcome every grant application that comes in. That's what they're there for. They're there to be used. And I suppose we welcome every grant that comes in, really. We like to see more and more people applying for the grants. Every time somebody applies for the WSS, it means to us that somebody else is in employment. And that's the ultimate goal, really, to try and increase the numbers of people with disabilities in employment.
In employment, absolutely. Brilliant. Okay, so we'll move on.
Yeah.
What's our next one? What else are you going to take out of the bag today,
Okay,
Dermot?
right, okay. We're still talking about money, I suppose. money and acronyms, Claire.
Yeah.
So the DASS, the Disability Awareness Support Scheme.
Yes.
And again, it was a slow burn for us many years ago, constantly promoting it at all the various seminars, conferences, and anywhere we got an opportunity. But we found that in the past couple of years, it's really taken off for us, and there's more and more applications coming in for it. It stands for the Disability Awareness Support Scheme, and there's funding available through the DASS to provide funding for a disability awareness trainer to come into a workplace, again private sector, and just try and create more awareness around disability among work colleagues and staff. And also to try and eliminate what's the word I'm looking
for?
Stereotypes and misperceptions about people with disabilities in their capacity to do work and be productive work colleagues. But it's a fantastic grant. There's up to €20,000 available through the Disability Awareness Support Scheme in the first year, or 90% of the cost of the training. In year 2 or in subsequent applications, up to 80% of the training is covered through the DASS.
Yeah, it's a brilliant one. Hopefully it'll be utilised more. And I've gone through the process with employers because I'm one of the trainers, and it's very straightforward.
It is.
It's very straightforward. So just to let employers know, you meet your trainer, you design the training that you want. There's a number of things that have to be done though, right? You have to, as a trainer, we have to cover legislation.
That's right.
Language.
Yes.
Etiquette.
Yeah.
We have to look at physical and sensory disabilities.
Exactly.
And mental health.
Exactly. So I'm glad you highlighted that, Claire, because if an employer wants a disability awareness trainer to come in and just talk about autism or talk specifically about mental health, what we ask is for the trainer to broaden it, to cover legislation, to cover etiquette, to cover all disabilities, and not just to zone in on something specifically. I suppose there's a lot of misperceptions out there about people with disabilities. An employer will often ask, if I employ somebody with a disability, will that increase my public liability insurance? And that's not the case at all. That's not true. Some employers will ask, if I employ somebody with a disability, will there be a high absenteeism? Again, that's not true. In fact, the truth is the opposite, really, because you'll find that if you employ somebody with a disability, they're very loyal. They're delighted to have the opportunity of employment, and absenteeism isn't a factor at all. Yeah,
and the other thing I'd say is they're also a very resilient group of people, because they have had to navigate their lives to date with another layer of difficulty, and they have overcome many barriers in their life. So hiring someone from this talent pool, is an advantage to the company.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, and the other thing I'd say about the DSS is when the training is completed, you return all your receipts to the DEASP, to the department, and you get your payment,
Absolutely.
And you just have to make sure you have your tax clearance certificates, guys. Okay,
that's
clear. Everything has to be in order for you to get this grant.
I suppose that's one thing with I suppose any of the government departments. Yes. The documentation, the paperwork has to be in order, and everybody has to be tax compliant. But it's fairly straightforward in terms of the application form and so on. And once it's approved, the training takes place. The invoices are returned. And people get paid. Yeah,
and that's it. And awareness is key. I've done the training, and it's incredible the questions that you're asked. And like, people have experience of maybe one type of disability. They might have a brother with Down syndrome or a father with macular degeneration. But when you're talking about it in general and they just see all the different possibilities and the fact that most people acquire their disability during their work life, I suppose a penny drops somewhere, there's awareness, and then they're more aware with their colleagues. And I call it disability confidence. That's what I call my training. I'm like, this training will make you disability confident with your colleagues, with your customers, with whatever you're doing in your life. If you're training rugby for kids, or it's part of life. So let's get talking about it and straight talking about it. So if companies can offer that to their employees, it'll have benefits within your company, but I really believe it'll have benefits in the community as well. Absolutely. Having more awareness for every element of life.
Absolutely. No, it's true, what you touched on there, Claire. I think there's a lot of people out there, just from my own personal experience, who are maybe a little bit conscious of dealing with people with disabilities. How do I deal with them? What do I say to them? I don't want to offend them. And after doing the disability awareness training, they're more confident in dealing with people with disabilities. People with disabilities just want to be treated the same way as everybody else. They don't want any special treatments. So that's one of the benefits that comes from the disability awareness training.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to be included. That's the big thing. I was in the Kingsley Hotel yesterday doing training, and we had all the different departments there, food and beverage, accommodation, and we were talking about all the different disabilities and what they can do, and they had to come up with ideas of just 10% change. What can you do to be more inclusive by 10%? And we came back with brilliant ideas.
Fantastic.
From the accommodation department, from the front desk department, from food and beverage. So inclusive employers and inclusive leaders in the hotel industry. It's going to be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good.
Great. Okay, so have we another one? There's
one other grant.
One more.
Claire,
okay.
One last one. Again, there's quite
it's like Christmas.
It's like Christmas. This is it's like Santa Claus here with all these various grants.
We'll call you Santa Dermot.
This is it. There's one last one. Is the employee retention grant, and this one is for somebody who acquires a disability. So you could be working for 10, 15, 20 years, and you acquire a disability, as many people do. And you might be in a situation where you're in danger of losing your job. There's up to €15,000 available through the employee retention grant in two ways. First of all, to put supports and accommodations in place to keep you in your current role. If that's not possible, the funding can be used to have you retrained to take up another position in the same company, but ultimately to keep you at work.
Brilliant.
So that's the employee retention grant.
Okay, that's key, isn't it? Because you can acquire a disability at any time as a result of an illness, as a result of an accident. Okay. Maybe an ongoing health issue, say something like diabetes type 2. You may become vision impaired with diabetic retinopathy. Okay, so it's such a complex phenomena, isn't it? Disability. So to know that your employer, they know they have a really good person, but you may not be able to do the job you did before. For example, I know someone with a spinal injury, and it's not just his mobility that is impaired now. He's much more clumsy. He said even the feeling in his hands, he drops things. So say, for example, you're a plumber and you get a spinal injury. The company still wants to keep you, but you may need to be retrained to work in something else, because you mightn't be able to work with the tools that you worked with before, because there's nothing worse than it's bad enough to get a disability, right? It's hard. All right, we'll call a spade a spade. It doesn't, it makes life a little bit more difficult. But to turn around and lose your job as well. All right.
Absolutely.
That really is hard. So that is a brilliant grant. That I hope people are listening to now, employers are listening to, and individuals are listening to. You can retain your job and, be retrained.
Absolutely. And, as part of that funding, there's an allocation there for an OT, an occupational therapist, to come in and do a workplace assessment and to devise a plan or a strategy to keep the person in their current role or have them retrained so that they can be redeployed to another part of the company.
Okay. Brilliant.
And we don't get many applications for it, but whenever the applications do come in, they're successful, and it keeps the person at work.
Brilliant. Listen, loads of information here today for employers. You've given it us all, explained it very well. All very straightforward applications.
Yeah.
All right. So Dermot, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Claire. It's great to get the
Dermot
opportunity.
Crosby from the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection. Everything that you need to know, this man will help you with.
Thank you very much, Claire.
Right.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks.